everybody. Well, it's nice to see you and see laughing faces, and that gives me much more contact to all of you. Although I'm very happy that it worked quite well last time. But there are people even doubled, so I see them in the room and on the screen, which is not necessary, but anyway. Okay. Joelle introduced the formal methods for modeling. Becca Kahn yesterday made a strong argument for linked data of our resources. And I will somehow talk about a combination of two of them, which continues from the point Joelle started to make, and what we discussed yesterday and what Francesco will discuss in the afternoon, from the point that having these vocabularies to describe our models, we could start to reuse these models and to share these models and try to integrate them somehow. In reality, most of this does not happen. And the basic situation in the World Wide Web, and the Semantic Web in particular, is that these kind of modeling rich constraints, Joelle has described in the, at the end, are functioning only, well, they should in theory function over the full internet, but they usually are only applied to local databases. The concept of the Semantic Web starts with the idea that published data is true by being published. So there is no restriction in the Semantic Web apart from an abstract trust layer, which is not implemented on the logical trust, only implemented on, or starts to be implemented on the communication trust. That whenever we publish data that is available, and this data can be published by everybody on every topic, which sounds probably very generous to people who craft their very great protocol database. But on the other hand, on this linked data perspective, which Becca yesterday introduced, it is precisely an advantage, because this means that when somebody creates an edition like the Ministerratsprotokolle, and somebody else studies Italian Risorgimento, these data sets could overlap and could in theory merge. So you could reuse from one or the other side of the data. But only if interoperability is possible by making these statements, by making this data easily alignable. And the question we'll discuss now and later on is a bit about this, how easy this is, and what we can do to enhance this, the alignability. Basic idea is that these triples in the RDF model are described or expressed with URIs. So they are expressed with technical concepts, which is by definition of the W3C unique. So you can have only one URI. Well, you can have only one URI because one URI is a unique identifier. So even if you use the same URI somewhere else, you assume, you assert, you claim that it's the same thing as somewhere else. Or other way around, if you put a URI into your URL, which is not the same, I will talk about this a bit later, into your browser, you expect to get exactly one page, and not by being somewhere get another page just because you're now in China. So it's the same concept. And the idea is so that defining models, defining things with URIs helps us to create data which is just by reusing URI interoperable. So Uris as creating interoperability, first step. Second step is now boiling it down to prosopography. What kind of vocabularies might be useful? And Joela already introduced these Wikidata and schema.org as two large, covering large-scale subjects, vocabularies, and already hinted us to that Google, when creating schema.org, did not insist on that as a semantic web technology, but they said, okay, we want to create web pages, and so we want to have a vocabulary describing the web pages in a way where we know what it means. And Wikidata said, okay, we have lots of information, lots of Wikipedias, and we want to make sure that these Wikipedias somehow interrelate. So we need a vocabulary to describe what happens in Wikipedia pages. And in fact, I have to correct Joela a little bit, although he's completely correct and not wrong, but extending his notion about Wikidata. Wikidata changes currently from being a formal structured representation of data in the Wikipedia towards being a Wikipedia style worldwide database. So you can find concepts in Wikidata where there's no Wikipedia article on. That's what's happening slowly. So people are dumping data sets into Wikipedia and Wikidata. Anyway, we have Google and schema.org, which would be the first place if you look for Uris to use in your data description, where you would say, okay, person, let's look at schema.org and person, there's lots of person descriptors, why not use them? Would be made easy, even Google would understand them. So if I publish data with this kind of description, I would have the largest search engine around and all the computer scientists to do something with it. And would have to add it into the web pages that they really do something with it. You will probably not be completely happy because it's just, well, it covers everyday approaches, assuming that your research projects are much more complicated situations than just knowing if there is somebody having an email address. It might be not sufficient, but we will have a look on it later on in exercise if there's time. Where you can browse it through and maybe realize there's lots of things which would be easy. The second, the nice thing about the schema.org is that it's somehow easy documented. So if you go to the schema.org person, you get a list of all the properties that have and some headings, so it's not that complicated to use. If you use the collective brain of Wikidata, one could say, okay, it's probably much better in the sense of it covers more real world situations, not just those which Google is commercially interested in, which is a theoretical approach. The discussion about properties to be defined Wikidata is a strong discussion, and so there is collective thinking about the properties, but they are very bad in organizing these in some formal structures where you can find your way. You see this only by having these three links in the slides and the slide, because and not even sure if I covered the most important one. I would assume that the category person's properties is the most informative, because that is very Wikipedia style. You have create something and you put a category on it, and then it's collected automatically. The others are methods trying to reorganize this, and then you get the property associated with people to things which are very small domains, like famous singers or actors or even yellow press things stuff. Okay, so these are rich resources to find properties you want to reuse and thus help other people understanding what you need. But both of them have their drawbacks if you think about, okay, I'm a prosopographer and have my research interest. There are, the next one is something which is from the modeling side, I think one of the easiest to grasp and one of the easiest to reuse probably, which was created when the Semantic Web was very young. 2003 they started, and I did not deep research on it, but my impression is that the Gerdes and Galbraith were or are computer scientists or programmers, developers with an interest in biography and genealogy. So you get a feeling a bit, okay, they have this a property which refers a person to a website where there's a biography on this person. Yeah, okay. That's useful, and I think a good modeling decision to have something like this, but that not covers core prosopography approaches. Still, I'm a bit in favor of it because it's strong on the event modeling. By this, it's and still easy to grasp. It might be a step, an intermediate step, an easy step to get into the site. There is a publication by Finnish colleagues, which created a data model for biographies, which is theoretically interesting and sound, but they never published an easy to find formal ontology of this. So reading the paper might be inspiring, but does not help you to reuse something. The resource probably the most thought through and in the perspective most useful is the SARI documentation, because there are people from the SIDOC, and in particular people which have a practical approach and a very, I think, sensible approach to the SIDOC theorem were involved. Georg Vogeler and Nicola, his surname, I forgot his surname. But it's still, the documentation is now readable. It was a long time in progress. But still, it is so close to the SIDOC theorem that it's not that easy to copy from there. You might remember a bit the talks from yesterday about how complicated this distributes all the information which you could put in one simple field. You could draw on authority files, because they have lots of personal information, and so they're widely distributed. They usually use an ontology which is very close to the original data they use, so they are usually not very thought through, these models. So you get identifiers like main entry in my list, which was sensible when it was a list, printed list, but it does not help you for your modeling. Okay, having this list, I could add lots of others. And I'm referencing a paper by Hans Fockens and Vermaak here, and copy a small table they created when they started to try to compare biography models. So models which were created by projects which do this completely same thing. They have a dictionary of biographies, a long collection, a huge collection of biographies, and want to create a database out of it. And every of them created their own style. And looking at these columns, you even see that apart from their lifespan, they even not share any other property, and these properties of people to describe are even all very, very generic. Or maybe not generic. Faith why should somebody record faith? Well, yeah, of course, in Western European culture, after the Reformation, it becomes standard that we have two confessions. If we consider cultural borders to the Muslim area, okay, it might be obvious that this is crucial. If we think in terms of medieval Spanish monasteries, faith in this generic approach is obviously nonsense. There might be lots of different theological problems to be assigned yourself, but okay. And I love very much the claim of fame, person type category, which is the typical category you find in lots of these vocabularies where a person is identified by being a politician or being a writer. There are long times where people were not writers, they were just children. But still, it's something which you put a label on somebody to distinguish them from the others. All these are just showing how different you could create structures. And if you look on the left side, you don't have to read it in detail, but there's one column where you even see that the basic fundamental model applied, which organizes all the rest. There's at least the possibility to do two types. So to do an event-based model or to do a relation-based model. So the thing which with Michele yesterday showed a bit, saying, okay, in the synthetic theorem, you could say everything is an event, and if you marry somebody, then there's the event of the marriage, and afterwards you're married to somebody. The relation model would say you're married to somebody from the marriage to the end of the marriage. Okay, anyway, there is a vast amount, and yeah, in the end, it comes probably to, well, use what you like. The bio vocab based on events, just a brief description. It's not that long, it's have a look at it. We will probably do a regular session and an exercise at the end where we just collect. I have put all the exercises I thought about into the website, so you just copy them. So we have things which are directly related to persons, or where you have an event in between, where you have relationships between pure events, or you have relationships between events and persons. And so you create by the event another relationship to another person, or you can relate events amongst each other. So there are sequences and stuff like this. Yeah, so that would be the exercise, which I think is sensible, but I will skip this and talk a bit about other vocabularies. Other vocabularies, precisely, we had yesterday heard from Michele that John Bradley has published an old representation of his factory prosopography. If you dive deeper, you could realize that you have expressed the same things with other vocabularies. Maybe not as precise or a bit different. There is even in the synthetic theorem an extension which points towards interpretation and argumentation. So having a justification of an argument, like a source, creating an argument in the sense of the source tells us somebody was born, and linking these, who does this by which method. There is the provenance model by the WS3C, which is strong on, okay, we have one data set and we create another data set from it, and we describe the steps happening in between, which means we have a source data set, a critical addition or an image or anything, and then we start to do HDR, we start to do automatic entity identification. Just put this into the prof model, record this, what we did, and in the end we have an assertion, we have database, possibility database coming out. Would we describe something similar. The W3C web annotation model could be used to describe a factoid approach. To say, okay, I have one resource, I do an annotation on this resource, and this annotation is structured again by my own definitions. Sorry to confuse you. This one is now a bit deeper in the factoid model, and as much as I love the factoid model from its theoretical approach, and I'm a strong defender of it, I'm not completely convinced that John did the best work when creating the OL. All these databases he created, I have the impression are much better than the OL he did here. I tried to extract the main part here. I've put the link in to the visualization in the web page. Where we have here the core area, we have a person, where we have a source, and where we have the factoid, which is a subclass of the any kind of assertion in there. But my mind started already to become complicated anyway. So that is creating the data you would put in your database, if not caring about factoids, because we just say person X is born on a specific date. But then you would add the source, that to say, okay, I have this from a specific source, and you would have to relate it to the person. There, I'm losing track in the model. One of the reasons why I developed this, developing this model, which tries to make this a bit more easily to understand, and in particular to query and compute. RESTful API, which Matthias will explain on Thursday, why this is a sensible idea, should be as easy as possible to map to lots of other models, although it should be expressive enough that you don't lose something, although it wouldn't be the main modeling instance authority where you say, you use this and you will cover all your problems. You will cover all your problems, but you will keep, you won't be completely interoperable. Which design models having factoid, and this factoid links a source to a person and to the statements you can make from the source on the person. Basic idea, I'm the researcher, I'm sitting there and reading my source, and I think there is a person mentioned, and then, so I have all this information on myself, I'm working on it, and the person is the model, the entity in the model which has the least properties, because the person is just identified. I think the concept prosopographers should be very strong on, to say the identity of a person is the only thing we can tell about the person without a source. In theory, we could even say, not even say this, but we just claim that there is a person. And then we start to talk about this person by reading the sources. So everything we know about the person is not related to the person, but is already a statement created in a factoid. That is why there is just an ID and possible references to other identifiers, which we think is say person. The source has to be described somehow, could be referenced, and the statement is the thing where the standard database things happen. So in the statements, Matthias, Gunther, and me are sometimes discussing them. Finally, I think at the end, almost. Some typical properties, raw, very raw. So a name, yeah, that usually happens, that people got names. We know that we know about people who don't have names. So we would not enforce this, but the name, most people will feel happy, and they can have a role. So they can be president of something or king of something, and then the role sometimes even replaces the name, we know. Then people are related to groups or to other people. People do something and this is an event. And one of the important approaches in this model of these statements is that we consider the possibility that everything could be an event, even if it's not explicitly declared as an event, which makes life very easy, because you could just say person has name. Later on realize, oh, person has name only from a specific date to another date, because then he became probe who changed his name. That is a name in theory is an event as well, but usually we don't care about these events. So that allows here not only adding dates and places to exist other properties, but even define other new event style. So describing, okay, I was commander in the Battle of, I was soldier in the Battle of, so the event is the Battle of, and the role would be the commander soldier. And then we come in the area where we said, no, come on, we'll finish. Now we are reaching the domains where we cannot decide on what is there. And said, okay, we could create even only verbal descriptions, just a statement, text, pure text, direct citation. Or we can classify this a bit by types, or we can cut the text and just say, okay, we have a statement type because we have good taxonomy describing events, and then we model our events in the statement type and reference somewhere else. That's the idea of this. Okay, examples, they're more for reading and getting an idea. This would be a kind of example where it's completely flat, the information about in the statement. It's just text. It's a short biography. Why not? It's information about the person. We're really happy to have it. It would not be easy to search and to select from this, but even full text search could help us. Or we could have structured data, which now would be an event style data, where we say, okay, there's the birth, and birth takes place someone and somewhere. And with this, we could already start to link to other vocabularies. Say, okay, if you want to know more about this, here is our reference. We think our Geburt thing is the same. So next exercise. And last part of this reuse thing. What I described now was the modeling part where we create our concepts how to describe people and prosopographical work. The controlled vocabulary is the area which focuses on linking data points, information we have to other resources. From one side to reuse directly this information, so have some standardized minimal information on somebody occurring or a location of a place, and to make it easier for others to link to our data. These authority-wise controlled vocabularies came up in the print world and very strong, supported by libraries, because they learned, okay, if I have a book about Georg Vogeler, written by Georg Vogeler, there might be people who have only heard it and lose one E, because my name very often is spelled with G-L-E-R-R. Sounds in German completely similar. So we need a list where we say, okay, in this case there's a mistake, but still it's the same person. Or think about Pressburg, Bartholomew, Schaffron. 3 names for the completely same place. No, Schaffron's. No, sorry. Bartholomew, Lisa has enough of English. Just egal. No. Anyway, Betz is Serbian for Vienna, for example, and etc., etc. You know these, many of them, probably. Okay, so they created a list where they defined main entries, and published them. So they became authoritative because there was an editorial team sitting in the library, and collecting this and deciding this one is the correct one, and all the others are just referencing. And please prefer this correct one. And then we're converted to data. And this data is now available, and this data has pushed lots of things in creating knowledge in the World Wide Web. So what happened in this process from print to digital things was that from a human readable, understandable formulation of how to express the identity. Here, fürs Metternich, well, could be Metternich, Clemens, Wenzel, Lippenburg, Lothar von, and you have to decide if you put it with K or C already, and put all the names, etc., to create an abstract identifier, which is a number. And from this, the next step is, okay, let's use this as a unique, World Wide Web unique number by adding, well, converting it into something like, which looks like an URL. Yeah, sources of control vocabularies, I will go through them. That was an attempt to wake you all. So please use the chat and type in the controlled vocabularies you know and maybe even are using. Just adding them that you know inside. Which helps me to skip all those you know already. Hatte ich doch fast weg. Nein, ich habe die verwechselt. Okay, just start to send. Curious what happens. How much? Double call. GD, VIAF, GD. Guido, great, GD. There are lots of people from German-speaking area around, so that's my yeah, happening. VIAF, GD, geonames. Dublin core and short on the I don't know, but Dublin core would be not a controlled vocabulary. Most part of it, Dublin core would be a schema, a metadata schema. Wikidata, yeah. So already finished. It's focusing on a few, which is a bit sad. Anyway. But at least I have the two already covered, because you know of them. Bartholomew is a very great resource. You find lots of controlled vocabularies on weird subjects. I have deliberately put a non-German speaking, although we don't have any French person here. I should have selected an Italian one, because knowing all the Italians in the group. The national libraries very often maintain these. The Italian is not that easy accessible. That's one of the reasons why the French CITOC is, I think, they were very early in being open and adding interesting new things. Okay, so that's library world. The naming G&D and VIAF is something which, okay, there's, thanks Francesco for the there is a concept which is a bit more than just having a controlled vocabulary, because it has been converted by people with no technological knowledge and no information science knowledge into a metaphor for being able to link. It's either the G&D number or the VIAF ID, which is a synonym. I want to have some link to somewhere else, and that's a good reason, and that's one of the reasons why I'm still promoting VIAF, although VIAF is a meta resource which has its problems by being created from other resources, so it's adding impreciseness to the existing impreciseness in the original data, but still it's very strong on linking to other data, because it collects 60-something national library authority files into one. It just gets used as a pointer from or a link, a hub from one ID to all the others. So VIAF ID points you into the right world. Okay, I talked about already very much about Uris. Here is the point in the Uris which is important on URI and URL. URI is an identifier. So it just uses the syntax of URLs to create something which is unique, because the syntax is built on from the left to the right, it becomes more specific. So if this one is different, everything which is here has a domain already, has a specific range context. So you could reuse numbers here, which would be then only applied to this part. So as an identifier, you have a hierarchy getting detailed, detailed, detailed. That they are used, the fact that these URIs are used for URLs makes it a bit confusing sometimes, because some of the resources, many of the resources use the URI, resolve the URI directly and use it as a link to display information about the URI. So you can use the URI and type it in and a web page occurs. The web page has a song. But several others say, okay, the web page is something different from the URI. And I have a method which does the same. So if I put in the URI, I see something human readable, but the human readable thing has a different URL. So just copying the URL you see from the web page you have found on VIAF or something else is a risk. Usually these sites, websites have an explicit information about things like permalink or URI, or having an RDF representation. And in this RDF representation, there you would find the real URI. That happens in particular because you could, with the REST interface, you could call the URI without getting a human readable result. So it's a good idea to have the URI separate from the human readable thing. Although that's not not necessary. So URIs is the method to semantic web method to use, and the method which is the easiest to maintain uniqueness, because it's built in. There are lots of applications, and you can do that by yourself in your model, saying, okay, I have a column in my table which tells me that's the GD number. So why would I have to put all the geonames number, all this stuff? I could just put the number. That's happening here. So you have to declare somehow and somewhere as explicit as possible what the schema is you're referencing to, and translate it if possible to something which is it could be expanded to the URI, and then put just the ID. Okay. Control-heritage institutions provide control vocabularies. The archival world is slow, which is for historians very sad, because most of the information archives provide on people are not people who have written a book, or there is a book written about them. So librarians don't know them. That's sad, but that means, well, we have to be happy that, for example, in American institutions, there was the Archives Nationales de France, and they are a bit stronger on creating formal descriptions of the creators of their Archive de France, and by this create richer resources on historical people. The museum world is a bit more effective, in particular because the Getty Institute is very engaged in these activities. We have vocabularies we could use not for people, but for information about people. And when I introduce geonames and you put your geonames there, it would be a controlled vocabulary, not to identify a person, but to identify the place, some event in the direction of the person occurs. The World Historical Gazetteer is broad-ranging activity with not much resources into. So there's not much to find there. Currently building lots of things above Pleiades, and so they have lots of ancient history data, but then you can even use Pleiades itself. It's a bit sad. I would be happy if the historic gazetteer board would become better. But to this I'll come a bit later. Periodo again is kind of very strongly supported by ancient history and archaeology, particularly because you have lots of time descriptors in archaeology, which are just descriptors in raw, not very precise date ranges, while historians usually just put years counted by Christian era and do not care too much if it's medieval or very modern, although when I talk about it's the case. So that again is a bit ancient history style. Occupations would be very, very useful, and the history of work group in Amsterdam is, well, I'm very grateful that they exist, but they created that early their database of occupations. On a theoretically, I think, sensible approach, because they started from sources describing occupations, so images, the label name on it. That's a good thing, because then that's not just a label, a personal interpretation. But the system in itself has not come into the Semantic Web yet. So using Hisco for as Uris is not really possible now. Although you can at least download the tables with that structure, so you could start maybe to build something by yourself. The Getty Institute is very strong. I said already, the Arts and Architecture thesaurus is probably the resource whenever you come to something which is culturally produced, first place to look, because probably some artists will have either created it or worked with it. But it's growing. Exercise, skip this. This slide is very important, because this slide starts with a lot of things where you could have a look at. And some of this would be completely boring to you, because you know, yeah, of course, the Hanger project, Julia, it's me, so don't care. I'm a musician with a historian. I know the Vogt activities. The Vogt is even extending this to a more generic resource. And Dan, I don't know if Dan is here, would say, hey, it's me, and etc. So that's, yeah, lots of very great resources which you could reuse. So doing research on Crusaders would probably mean, okay, my Crusaders could have been connected to the Syriac people in the 12th century in Syria and Middle East. So I will have a look there if people I'm interested in occur there as well. Which in the end only means whenever you create a cross-cultural database, that will become controlled vocabulary to be reused by others. Keep this in mind, not getting afraid, but being proud of it. You are the one who creates high quality data. You are the one who is caring for the sources. You are the one who is bringing it together with other information and interpreting it. So it's your task to create these controlled vocabularies. The drawback, of course, is that it will be probably your project only. And if you don't do the project like Maxim Romanov did, I want to study all biographies in the largest Arabic texts about biographies and extract all names, so I have in the end at least the cultural knowledge about all people in the Muslim world in the Middle Ages. Well, it's written in the 10th century. In these books, there are not many other sources anyway, but still, it is a small project in the sense of it's his project. And it could become a resource useful for lots of people. That's true for everything you're doing. If you start from an edition, you know the resources much better than anybody else. So you do it. Try to reuse and refer to others that this interconnection becomes easy, and create URIs. And this list is just an exercise. I should have deleted the not good ones. 4 things: 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's vote. Which one you think would be the best URI to use? Typing in the chat again. Okay, if you have decided, there are already some suggestions. Focusing. Second. Anybody wants to argue for the second? Good point. Although that's one of the weird decisions with this HTTPS and the URI thing, that in the URI theory you don't need any of the protocol would be
I want to say before, all your geonames and GND URIs
but then, so the problem is, and that's precisely URI URL, good difference. The URI could be HTTP, nobody would care because URI is just an identifier. But the automatic resolving would sometimes not work if the programmers did not program something which translates the HTTP to HTTPS. As lots of URIs were created in the before HTTPS was declared standard, they exist and they are there, and thus changing it to HTTPS might be even not the best idea. Still, now doing it is correct. The second one you're attempting to, probably by the same reason as me, is the one where there is the least technical information in the URI possible. Because here you have already this information, you need a specific software environment which creates this. You could, in theory, use this as URI as well, but then you would have to make sure that this resolves. This one is using verbal description, which has the risk of being not acceptable anymore.
Plus, it includes an umlaut.
It includes Semantic Web officially is IRI.
Yes,
anyway,
course,
that's another problem
software.
which might create a problem. It includes space, which is resolvable, but is not the most best thing. So having a number or something abstract is preferred. And this one, you use a commercial provider. So even if it's an URI, and in the sense of unique identifier, it has the risk that resolvability is reduced. Okay.